Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 27 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. Welcome to the final episode of the Intimate Marriage Podcast in 2023. I'm going to be doing something that I've never done before. This entire episode is going to be my responses to questions that I have received. I really love providing so much free content through my podcast, through all of my social media accounts. If you don't follow me on Facebook, Instagram, some TikTok, YouTube, be sure to follow me there. I also send emails to my list on a regular basis with a lot of, inspiring stories and information that you can implement in your life right away. So if you're not on my email list, by all means join. You can just go to the show notes and click to join my email list. And through each of these different platforms that I've described, where I'm pretty active, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, as I said, some TikTok, and my email list. Oh, and LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn too. But anyway, I receive a lot of questions from people. And usually, if it's something quick, I do respond. But I receive a lot of questions that require just more of a response. And so I have collected a number of them here to answer in this episode. And actually, I want to say one more thing, which is I also have a Facebook group, the Intimate Marriage Facebook group. And that is the place where if you have questions for me, I give the most answers, because it's not just for anyone to see. It's just for the people who have joined the group, and we can have some dialogue back and forth. You can ask follow-up questions. So if you're not in my Facebook group, by all means join. It's the Intimate Marriage Facebook group on Facebook, of course. Okay, so this question actually came to me from my Facebook group. How do you keep the passion alive when you feel you are in a million roles at once? Daughter, mother, partner, niece. I try to have an integrated experience of life, but sometimes I shut off the passion part in order to serve my other roles. Thank you. This is a really great question. It's why I'm starting off with it, because I think whether you're a man or a woman, if you have a lot of responsibilities, if you are an educated professional and working, or maybe you're at home with your children, but handling the household and all the different responsibilities, I think all of us can relate. And the thing that is worth just having in mind is that most of the areas of our life, if we take our attention off, if we sidestep, they can take it for a very short amount of time, but then we start getting feedback that we need to engage. If we want to just take a break from parenting, our kids start acting in a way that gets our attention, and then we stay on it. Or if there are bills to pay and you just ignore it, we get feedback. If you wait long enough, the feedback comes in the form of collection agencies, but late fees and penalties and decreased credit scores, there's a consequence. And similarly, if we're just taking our attention off of work and not doing a good job, there are consequences. So anyway, you know all of that. The point is that creates motivation to keep the house clean, make the bed in the morning, pay the bills on time, do the parenting, fulfill all the many responsibilities as daughter, mother, niece, and partner in terms of logistical things. We do not have any kind of built-in mechanism when we take our attention off of passion and romance and sensual intimacy, other than when it gets so far and one person wants to, or both want to leave the marriage. But I'm not talking about that kind of situation. This question isn't about that kind of situation either. It's how do you cultivate the passion when there's so many other things asking for our attention? So I want to say two things. One is that either we're motivated by inspiration or by desperation. And so many of us like to think that we're motivated by inspiration. It feels morally superior. But the fact is that often humans are motivated by desperation. So that means that we want to avoid the negative consequences of taking our attention off of each of those areas of life that I've already mentioned. But we have a lot of reserves before we're motivated by desperation when it comes to passion and sensual intimacy in a marriage. So part of my answer for this question is to explore how to be motivated by inspiration, how to do things not to avoid a negative consequence, but because they are just so good and luscious. And if you are regularly tending the passion in your marriage, it inspires more attention. So once you tap into how this is going to work in a way that serves you and your partner, it will continue to blossom without needing a whole lot of extra nurturing. I also want to say that we can push ourselves and fulfill parenting duties, daughterly duties, professional duties, when we're a little hungry, a little tired, a little this, a little that, in any case, in a stressed state. Passion, enjoyable, pleasure, erotic activities, they do not happen in a stressed state. So if this question really speaks to you, I invite you to journal on what it would be like to be motivated by inspiration. What would call to you that would keep passion more front and center for your attention. I also encourage you to look for ways to really reduce the stress in your life. And sure, if you can remove stressful circumstances, that's great. But often that's not such an option. What is an option is to be able to meditate or take a hot bath or take a walk each day, not pushing a stroller, not needing to take care of anybody else, just to be with yourself in nature, or do yoga or masturbate, really read a book, whatever it is that brings you back to yourself, to where you feel delight in your body, to where you have reserves so your feelings aren't hurt if someone says something, so that you have the energy that is the prerequisite for passion. Because I think our lives are so busy that sometimes we need to focus on the passion. And actually, I did a podcast episode on scheduling intimacy and passion, and I'll link that in the show notes. And those are really good options, but I also think it's really valuable to just go upstream and attend to feeling delight, smelling flowers, enjoying the food you eat, paying attention to the fibers you wear. In other words, finding the calm and the pleasure and the joy and the ease, because from there, passion certainly will flourish. All right, my next question, which comes from a man. He responded to an email that I sent, and this was his question that he sent a reply and asked this question. Could you please clarify what you mean by connection? Can you be more specific? I think this is a really great question. Connection is a word in the English language that it's used. It's not a complicated vocabulary word, but it is a word that is used to mean so many different things by different people. And so I'm going to answer what I mean with the word connection and be very clear that it's context dependent. This is something that it's appropriate to be context dependent because sometimes connection means actually being in physical contact. Sometimes connection means having your attention on one another. Sometimes connection means a kind of trust and sense of being on the same team. So I don't actually recall what was the context for him asking this question, except, actually I do. I wrote something about the importance of focusing on connection more than content. And so I'll explain what I mean in that context. So if you're focused on content, you're focused on the details of whatever you and your partner are discussing. And let's say you're having some kind of a conflict. You want the kids to go to public school and your partner wants them to go to private school. And they can't go to both. So that's not a solution. You can be really focused and this becomes this conflict that the two of you are fighting about, or you just don't discuss it in order to avoid fighting. And in this case, you can get so intense about the content of why you think private school is better, how it's going to serve the children, the long-term impact, all this stuff. You get really, really, really into the content. But you will discover, not surprisingly, though frustratingly, that your partner, even though you're making all these brilliant arguments, they just dig their heels in further and basically are facing in a different direction and seeing the landscape of public school and getting into all of the details about that. It could be about that. It could be about how often you have sex. It could be about what kind of diet or exercise the family should be doing. I mean, it could be about whether or not the cap needs to be put on the toothpaste. Whatever it is, it's very easy to essentially get into debate mode and righteousness mode. And even if you are relatively quiet in your own head, your focus is on you being right and your partner being wrong. And that is related to the details of the situation, and that is being focused on the content. In contrast, being focused on the connection is making the feeling within you and between the two of you the most important part of the interaction. So in that case, whether it's the cap on the toothpaste or where the kids go to school or whether or not you pick up extra shifts at work, like it could be anything, you focus on feeling connection, on having the flavor between you feel good, on being respectful towards one another, on being open-minded and clear that the other person has a lot to contribute to this conversation, being open to who they are, even if you're not entirely open to everything they're saying. So in the scenario in which I'm recommending connection over content, that's what I mean. And sometimes when I use the word connection, I'm referring to a feeling of intimacy, a feeling that you are woven together, that you're aware of one another's breath. I don't mean literally the carbon dioxide exiting your mouth. I mean, it's a kind of feeling that you're blending your souls, that you have a sense of belonging. If I'm going to be concise in this rather nuanced, broad topic, I would say There's connection between the two of you when you both have a sense of belonging in that moment. Moving on to another question. How does intimacy and communication survive? In the pandemic, I had to bring home my 22-year-old nonverbal autistic son. He had previously been institutional for 10 years. He doesn't tolerate much conversation around him, and I only have about 40 hours of coverage. It's been this way for 2 weeks, and my relationship of 7 years has evolved to where we are now housemates in 2 different parts of the house. Well, my heart goes out to you, and whether there's such a major change of having a nonverbal autistic child at home after being institutionalized for 10 years, or things seem to not have any particular overt additional burden, the fact is that many relationships have not yet recovered from the pandemic. This is especially true for physicians and others who were front line during the pandemic. And I actually have come up with the term post-pandemic marital syndrome, because for those of you who really were navigating the intensity of the pandemic, I mean, all of us were, but those of you who were in a very literal, overt, hands-on way with the trauma and the pain and isolation of patients and the sense of inadequacy and overwhelm, all of that. So many people just found a way to survive, to put so many higher order needs in a box and temporarily throw away the key. In other words, to compartmentalize and be functional. And the pandemic has ended, and in general, in our society and in most specific relationships, we don't really know how to transition out of a traumatic phase into another phase to reconnect and rebuild and reopen. So let me just say, if you relate to what I'm saying and both of you want to find your way back to one another, the best thing I can recommend is the Aligned in Hot Marriage program. It is not intense, but it is so deep and effective and fun and transformational. And it will, through going through that program, I didn't design it for this because I designed it before the pandemic, but it will 100% function to help you find your way back to one another in a pace that works for you. There's nothing forced, but the goal will feel clear and appealing and not threatening. So I highly recommend, if this question feels like one you might have asked, not necessarily because you have a high special needs child at home, but in terms of finding your way back to one another post-pandemic, the Aligned in Hot Marriage program is going to give you so much. You can find it at alignedhotmarriage.com. The link will be in the show notes. And I actually have a sale for the holidays. And because I'm mentioning it in this podcast episode, I will extend that sale into January. So look in the show notes and you will see a coupon code for, I haven't done the calculations, but it's way more than 50% off. So just look in the show notes and you'll find it there. Now, for you who wrote the question, who does have a special needs child at home and only 40 hours of coverage, let me just say that the first step is communication. So maybe the first time you use some of those hours with coverage and leave the house and make a plan to be somewhere that's comfortable, whether it's a cafe or I don't know, somewhere in the woods, whatever, just taking a drive in the car, whatever would appeal to both of you that would create a really relaxed, easy environment, and just start talking. How's it going for you? What do you need? I don't know if I can provide it, but let's start with identifying our needs, because there are two things that need to happen for you to revive intimacy and communication. The first is just to make it clear that you want to communicate and you're interested. And then the second is to come up with some creative solutions together. But there's no point in coming up with creative solutions unless you first prioritize just opening your hearts, opening your minds, and opening your mouths. And start describing how it's been for each of you without any blame, without any accusation. If your partner's going to be defensive, then, or need to counterattack, then this is not going to accomplish the goal. This is for peaceful listening, no blame, really taking the attitude that you have been suffering individually, but together, and together you can find your way out of this challenging spot. All right, next question. How do you get a guy that doesn't show his emotions to, quote, make love or show the passion he might be feeling? Does he even have passion? Whilst the sex is pretty awesome in that he knows what I like and vice versa, we can talk openly and I always achieve orgasm. There's something that's missing. And if I had to put my finger on it, I'd say wild, erotic, passion. Is that just for the movies, or can we achieve this greatness? If so, I think it's him holding back. So how do I get him to let go and be a wild, exotic animal in bed? I have spoken to him about it, and whilst he's a teeny bit more there, sometimes he's just too respectful. And no, it's not a bad thing, as I cannot complain about the actual sex, but occasionally it would be nice to see a demon in his eyes and, I don't know, be pushed up against a wall and ravished by a primitive, instinctive man-beast. Well, yes, indeed. So it is totally possible, and it won't just happen of its own accord if you've been together a while and you have other routines. So there are two things I want to say in response to this question. The first is that good men have not been taught to access their wildness, to have permission for the beast to come out. I actually remember when I was navigating exactly this kind of a challenge in my own marriage, and I said something to my husband and wanting him to bring the wildness and let out the lion that I felt like it was in there, although it was pretty buried. And he said, I'm afraid if I let that out, I'm going to kill you. And happily, it wasn't too early in our marriage, or I would have just laughed, which would have hurt his feelings and had him feel incredibly unseen. I was far enough along to really hear that and take it seriously. My husband is a black belt in karate, and he has a lot of power. And of course, he is a kind, gentle person. He's a tender lover. And so it was sort of like cognitive dissonance for him, for me to want this other side of him, which he had been so glad to sublimate and overcome with his incredible intellectual prowess and good morality. It was confusing, and it also was a little bit confronting, terrifying, because it was much easier for my husband to be at 0 and 100, although he had never been at 100, but to figure out all the shades of gray in between and to be able to modulate and titrate, that was totally new territory. And so he opted for 0. So I'm guessing that you who asked this question, that that your man, either because of societal conditioning or something that happened in the past or feedback from another woman, like we don't know. And honestly, we don't even need to know. The important thing is that there's some reason that he is keeping a lid on it. And he may be aware of what that is, or he may not. So maybe just listen to this part of the podcast with him and see what he thinks. The second thing is, once both of you have permission and a desire to find your way into new territory with more wildness and kind of play with power dynamics rather than being so egalitarian and each of you get your needs met, like the passion you're talking about does not have PC power dynamics in it. Let me just say that. So how do you go from more egalitarian, very functional, good sex to the erotic intensity of passionate expression and being up against the wall? Well, the main thing is that you need to kind of remove the shackles of the familiar. Even though your familiar is really very good, there's still shackles because you're being held in them, in those routines, and in that vibe. So you can consider what would help disrupt that. One is to speak another language. I don't know if there's another language that you both know other than if you normally speak English. Is there another language you both know that you could use in the bedroom and allow different aspects of yourself to come out through speaking that language? Or maybe you talk gibberish, if that would be good. Maybe you do role plays. Maybe if you want to be thrown up against the wall like that, maybe you're a waitress and he's the chef, or you can come up with any kind of scenario. Perhaps you go to a bar and pretend it's a first date and you don't know one another yet and you're just meeting one another for the first time, and so all these new energies can come out. Maybe you have sex in different locations. Maybe you do things totally differently than you have before. Maybe you wear, if you have brunette hair, you wear a blonde wig. I mean, there are countless possibilities for how you do something different that has a little bit of risk to it. Not necessarily that it's not safe, but it just feels a little edgy. Or you seduce him into that territory. Either you plan it together or you create it and seduce him into it. But since you're in a long-term partnership, I give him a heads up so that he understands where you're coming from. So I hope there's something in that to play with, and that you find the keys to the erotic passion between you. How do I stay relaxed and happy when my husband isn't feeling well and is overwhelmed and shut down or burnt out? This is a very important question, and it's one that any of us in heteronormative relationships can relate to in both directions. As it happens, one of the questions was from a man, but all the others were from women. And this particular question could have been asked by a man or a woman. It's a very common scenario that our spouse is depleted. And how do we not get dragged down by that? Well, you need to find what works for you, and I'm going to give a few options. But the main thing that I would say about ways to not get dragged down by our partner's down energy is to enjoy. Actually, I'm going to give different answers for men and women. So if you're a woman in a heteronormative relationship and this is a question you have, my answer for you is to root yourself in your sensuality, to caress yourself every evening or morning or any other time of day, but to just slowly caress yourself. Maybe you have an oil that you enjoy, or slowly eat food which is delicious and nutritious, or paying attention as you get dressed to the feel of the fabrics on your skin. Do you enjoy silks? Do you enjoy cottons? What feels good on your body? Play music that just fills you. Use a scent or cook something that will both be delicious and be something you enjoy smelling in your home. The point is, use the 5 senses and your body to create pleasure-filled experiences, because that brings you home to yourself and your own magnificence and functions as a kind of immunization for your partner's downer energy. When you really are enjoying inhabiting your own body, it doesn't make his attitudes and mood irrelevant, but it does keep you from succumbing to them. Now, if you're a man whose wife is burnt out, downer energy, complaining, and you just want to have some light, fun interactions and maybe even some sex, well, for you, there are 2 things. One is look for what you can do that lightens her load. Can you do more in the way of kitchen cleanup, childcare, arranging doctor's appointments, tending to household needs? Like, whatever it is, say to her, what can I do to lighten your load? Because that is very often a big contributor to her feeling down and overwhelmed in this way. And the other thing is how to not be dragged down it or disconnect and dissociate. And the main thing is that many men who are superstars professionally look to their wives for approval. You may not even realize this until I'm inviting you to consider it if you're a man who relates and is in this situation. And your work is to trust yourself without needing your wife to validate you, because when she is burnt out and overwhelmed and kind of a downer, she's not in a position to validate you anyway, and you are better off becoming right with who you are. I don't have a super quick tip on how to do that other than look for opportunities. And if any of the things that I've talked about in these questions, if you want guidance, if you want my attention on you and your partner and the relationship between you and the desires you have and the challenges that prevent you from fulfilling those desires, then definitely go to my website, alexandrastockwell.com, to the contact page and send me a message and let me know that you are interested in private relationship and intimacy coaching. Now, this is definitely not for everybody. It is for you if you are an educated, successful professional, highly motivated, and ready and willing to invest time and resources in order to learn the skills that once you learn them, your marriage will be completely transformed, up-leveled, and your relationship with yourself will as well. You know, the kind of coaching I do, I don't play referee. I am looking for what is the growth that you need for your relationship to blossom, and what is the growth that your partner needs for the relationship to just open and become juicier and passionate and intimate in the most magnificent ways. And if you want that, I absolutely want to give it to you and know how. But if you're not so interested in taking responsibility for yourself and the relationship, you're not in a position to invest time and resources, you're ambivalent about whether or not your relationship deserves attention and investment from you, well, then keep listening to the podcast, read my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, get on my email list. I provide all kinds of things that are low cost or free. But if you want efficient, profound, sustained transformation to heat up your marriage, deepen the intimacy, and tap into the erotic passion, well, then the coaching that I have is custom made for you. So go ahead and reach out and let's talk about it. For all of you listening, whether you are ready for private coaching with me or you want to keep pursuing things with all of the other offerings that are available for you, I hope you reflect on this year as one that has really served you in becoming more aware of yourself and your relationship and where you want it to go, and that you set yourself up to go there in 2024. So I'm going to have a lot of different show notes for this episode because I've referred to so many different things throughout. And so just go to the show notes and find the ones that spoke to you. I want to reiterate that the Aligned and Hot Marriage is massively discounted today and for the rest of the week. And to invite anyone who's really ready to look back on this as the watershed moment that took your relationship from good to absolutely fantastic and great, then reach out to me. I want to do it with you.